We walked for about an hour. I succeeded in remaining without any thoughts. Then we came to a hillside. Don Genaro was there, sitting near the top of a rock wall. He greeted me effusively and had to yell his words. He was about 50 feet above the ground. Don Juan made me sit down and then sat next to me. Don Genaro explained that I had found the place where he had been waiting because he had guided me with a sound he'd been making. As he voiced his words, I realized that I had indeed been hearing a peculiar sound I thought to be a buzzing in my ears. It had seemed to be more of an internal affair, a bodily condition, a feeling of sound so undetermined that it was beyond the realm of conscious assessment and interpretation. I believed that Don Genaro had a small instrument in his left hand. From where I sat, I could not distinguish it clearly. It looked like a Jew's harp. With it, he produced a soft, eerie sound which was practically indiscernible. He kept on playing it for a moment, as if allowing me time to fully realize what he had just said. Then he showed me his left hand. There was nothing in it. He wasn't holding any instrument. It had appeared to me that he was playing some instrument because of the manner in which he had put his hand to his mouth. Actually, the sound was being produced with his lips and the edge of his left hand, between the thumb and index finger. I turned to Don Juan to explain to him that I had been fooled by Don Genaro's movements. He made a quick gesture and told me not to talk and to pay close attention to what Don Genaro was doing. I turned back to look at Don Genaro, but he was no longer there. I thought that he must have climbed down. I waited for a few moments for him to emerge from behind the bushes. The rock he had been standing on was a peculiar formation. It was more like a huge ledge on the side of a larger rock wall. I must have taken my eyes away from him for only a couple of seconds. If he had climbed up, I would have caught sight of him before he had reached the top of the rock wall, and if he had climbed down, he would also have been visible from where I was sitting. I asked Don Juan about Don Genaro's whereabouts. He replied that he still was standing on the rock ledge. As far as I could judge, there was no one there, but Don Juan maintained over and over again that Don Genaro was still standing on the rock. He didn't seem to be joking. His eyes were steady and fierce. He said in a cutting tone that my senses were not the proper avenue to appraise what Don Genaro was doing. He ordered me to shut off my internal dialogue. I struggled for a moment and began to close my eyes. Don Juan lurched at me and shook me by the shoulders. He whispered that I had to keep my view on the rock ledge. I had a sensation of drowsiness and heard Don Juan's words as if they were coming from far away. I automatically looked at the ledge. Don Genaro was there again. That did not interest me. I noticed semi-consciously that it was very difficult for me to breathe, but before I could have a thought about it, Don Genaro jumped to the ground. That act didn't catch my interest either. He came over to me and helped me stand up, holding me by the arm. Don Juan held my other arm. They propped me up between the two of them. Then it was only Don Genaro who was helping me walk. He whispered something in my ear that I couldn't understand, and suddenly I felt that he had pulled my body in some strange way. He grabbed me, in a manner of speaking, by the skin of my stomach and pulled me up to the ledge, or perhaps onto another rock. I knew that for an instant I was on a rock. I could have sworn that it was the rock ledge. The image was so fleeting, however, that I couldn't evaluate it in detail. Then I felt that something in me faltered, and I fell backwards. I had a faint feeling of anguish, or perhaps physical discomfort. The next thing I knew, Don Juan was talking to me. I couldn't understand him. I concentrated my attention on his lips. The sensation I had was dreamlike. I was trying to rip from the inside an enveloping film-like sheet that encased me, while Don Juan tried to rip it from the outside. Finally, it actually popped, and Don Juan's words became audible and their meaning crystal clear. He was commanding me to surface by myself. I struggled desperately to gain my sobriety. I had no success. I quite consciously wondered why I was having so much trouble. I fought to talk to myself. Don Juan seemed to be aware of my difficulty. He urged me to try harder. Something out there was preventing me from engaging myself in my familiar internal dialogue. It was as if a strange force were making me drowsy and indifferent. I fought against it until I began to lose my breath. I heard Don Juan talking to me. My body contorted involuntarily with the tension. I felt as if I were embraced and locked in mortal combat with something that was keeping me from breathing. I didn't have fear, but rather some uncontrollable fury possessed me. My wrath mounted to such heights that I growled and screamed like an animal. Then my body was taken by a seizure. I had a jolt that stopped me instantly. I could again breathe normally, and then I realized that Don Juan had poured his gourd of water over my stomach and neck, soaking me. He helped me sit up. Don Genaro was standing on the ledge. He called my name and then jumped to the ground. I saw him plummeting down from a height of 50 feet or so, and I experienced an unbearable sensation around my umbilical region. I had had the same sensation in dreams of falling. Don Genaro came to me and asked me, smiling, if I had liked his leap. I tried unsuccessfully to say something. Don Genaro called my name again. "Carlitos, watch me," he said. He swung his arms at his sides 4 or 5 times as if to get momentum, and then jumped out of sight, or I thought he did, or perhaps he did something else for which I had no description. He was 5 or 6 feet away from me, and then he vanished as if he had been sucked away by an uncontrollable force. I felt aloof and tired. I had a sense of indifference and didn't want to think or talk to myself. I wasn't afraid, but inexplicably sad. I wanted to weep. Don Juan hit me repeatedly with his knuckles on the top of my head and laughed as if everything that had happened were a joke. He then demanded that I talk to myself because that was the time when the internal dialogue was desperately needed. I heard him ordering me, "Talk, talk." I had an involuntary spasm in the muscles of my lips. My mouth moved without sounds. I remembered Don Genaro moving his mouth in a similar way when he was clowning, and I wished I could have said, as he had, "My mouth doesn't want to talk." I tried to voice the words, and my lips contorted in a painful way. Don Juan seemed to be on the verge of collapsing with laughter. His enjoyment was contagious, and I also laughed. Finally, he helped me to stand up. I asked him if Don Genaro was coming back. He said that Don Genaro had had enough of me for the day. "You almost made it," Don Juan said. We'd been sitting near the fire in the earth stove. He had insisted that I eat. I wasn't hungry or tired. An unusual melancholy had overtaken me. I felt removed from all the events of the day. Don Juan handed me my writing pad. I made a supreme effort to recapture my usual state. I jotted down some comments. Little by little, I brought myself back into my old pattern. It was as if a veil were being lifted. Suddenly, I was again involved in my familiar attitude of interest and bewilderment. "Good, good," Don Juan said, patting my head. "I've told you that the true art of a warrior is to balance terror and wonder." Don Juan's mood was unusual. He seemed almost nervous, anxious. He appeared to be willing to speak on his own accord. I believed that he was preparing me for the sorcerer's explanation, and I became quite anxious myself. His eyes had a strange glimmer that I had seen only a few times before. After I told him what I thought of his unusual attitude, he said that he was happy for me, that as a warrior he could rejoice in the triumphs of his fellow men, if they were triumphs of the spirit. He added that, unfortunately, I was not yet ready for the sorcerer's explanation, in spite of the fact that I had successfully solved Don Genado's riddle. His contention was that when he had poured water over my body, I had actually been dying, and my whole achievement had been cancelled out by my incapacity to fend off the last of Don Genado's onslaughts. Genado's power was like a tide that engulfed you, he said. Did Don Genado want to hurt me? I asked. No, he said. Genado wants to help you. But power can be met only with power. He was testing you, and you failed. But I solved his riddle, didn't I? You did fine, he said. So fine that Genado had to believe that you were capable of a complete warrior's feat. You almost made it. What floored you this time was not indulging, though. What was it, then? You're too impatient and violent. Instead of relaxing and going with Genado, you began to fight him. You can't win against him. He's stronger than you. Don Juan then volunteered some advice and suggestions about my personal relations with people. His remarks were a serious sequel to what Don Genado had jokingly said to me earlier. He was in a talkative mood, and without any coaxing on my part, he began to explain what had taken place during the last 2 times I had been there. As you know, he said, the crux of sorcery is the internal dialogue. That is the key to everything. When a warrior learns to stop it, everything becomes possible. The most far-fetched schemes become attainable. The passageway to all the weird and eerie experiences that you have had recently was the fact that you could stop talking to yourself. You have, in complete sobriety, witnessed the ally, Genado's double, the dreamer and the dreamed, and today you almost learned about the totality of yourself. That was the warrior's feat that Genado expected you to perform. All this has been possible because of the amount of personal power that you have stored. It started the last time you were here, when I caught sight of a very auspicious omen. As you arrived, I heard the ally prowling around. First I heard its soft steps, and then I saw the moth looking at you as you got out of your car. The ally was motionless, watching you. That, to me, was the best omen. Had the ally been agitated, moving around as if it was displeased with your presence, the way it always has been, the course of the events would have been different. Many times I have caught sight of the ally in an unfriendly state towards you, but this time the omen was right, and I knew the ally had a piece of knowledge for you. That was the reason why I said that you had an appointment with knowledge, an appointment with a moth that had been pending for a long time. For reasons inconceivable to us, the ally selected the form of a moth to manifest itself to you. But you said that the ally was formless and that one could only judge its effects, I said. That is right, he said, but the ally is a moth for the onlookers who are associated with you, Genado and myself. For you, the ally is only an effect, a sensation in your body, or a sound, or the golden specks of knowledge. It remains as a fact, nonetheless, that by choosing the form of a moth, the ally is telling Genado and me something of great importance. Moths are the givers of knowledge and the friends and helpers of sorcerers. It is because the ally chose to be a moth around you that Genado places such a great emphasis on you. That night that you met the moth, as I had anticipated, was a true appointment with knowledge for you. You learned the moth's call, felt the gold dust of its wings, But above all, that night for the first time, you were aware that you saw, and your body learned that we are luminous beings. You have not yet assessed correctly that monumental event in your life. Donado demonstrated for you with tremendous force and clarity that we are a feeling, and that what we call our body is a cluster of luminous fibers that have awareness. Last night, you were back again under the good auspices of the Ally. I came to look at you as you arrived, and I knew that I had to call Donado so he could explain to you the mystery of the dreamer and the dreamed. You believed then, just as you always have, that I was tricking you. But Donado was not hiding in the bushes as you thought. He came over for you, even if your reason refuses to believe it. That part of Don Juan's elucidation was indeed the hardest to take at its face value. I couldn't admit it. I said that Don Donado had been real and of this world. Everything that you've witnessed so far has been real and of this world, he said. There is no other world. Your stumbling block is a peculiar insistence on your part, and that peculiarity of yours is not going to be cured by explanations. So today, Donado addressed himself directly to your body. A careful examination of what you did today will reveal to you that your body put things together in a most praiseworthy manner. Somehow, you refrained from indulging in your visions at the irrigation ditch. You kept a rare control and aloofness, as warriors should. You didn't believe anything, but you still acted efficiently, and thus you were capable of following Donado's call. You actually found him, without any aid from me. When we arrived at the rock ledge, you were imbued with power, and you saw Donado standing where other sorcerers have stood, for similar reasons. He walked over to you after jumping from the ledge. He himself was all power. Had you proceeded as you did earlier by the irrigation ditch, you would have seen him as he really is, a luminous being. Instead, you got frightened, especially when Donado made you leap. That leap in itself should have been sufficient to transport you beyond your boundaries, but you didn't have the strength, and fell back into the world of your reason. Then, of course, you entered into mortal combat with yourself. Something in you, your will, wanted to go with Donado while your reason opposed him. Had I not helped you, you now would be lying dead and buried in that power place. But even with my help, the outcome was dubious for a moment. We were silent for a few minutes. I waited for him to speak. Finally, I asked, "Did Don Donado make me leap up to the rock ledge?" "Don't take that leap in the sense that you understand a leap," he said. "Once again, this is only a way of speaking. As long as you think that you are a solid body, you cannot conceive what I am talking about." He then spilled some ashes on the ground by the lantern, covering an area about 2 feet square, and drew a diagram with his fingers. A diagram that had 8 points interconnected with lines. It was a geometrical figure. He had drawn a similar one years before when he tried to explain to me that it was not an illusion that I had observed the same leaf falling 4 times from the same tree. The diagram in the ashes had 2 epicenters. One he called reason, the other will. Reason was interconnected directly with a point he called talking. Through talking, reason was indirectly connected to 3 other points: feeling, dreaming, and seeing. The other epicenter, will, was directly connected to feeling, dreaming, and seeing, but only indirectly to reason and talking. I remarked that the diagram was different from the one I had recorded years before. The outer form is of no importance, he said. These points represent a human being and can be drawn in any way you want. Do they represent the body of a human being? I asked. Don't call it the body, he said. These are 8 points on the fibers of a luminous being. A sorcerer says, as you can see in the diagram, that a human being is first of all will, because will is directly connected to 3 points: feeling, dreaming, and seeing. Then next, a human being is reason. This is properly a center that is smaller than will. It is connected only with talking. What are the other 2 points, Don Juan? He looked at me and smiled. You're a lot stronger now than you were the first time we talked about this diagram, he said. But you're not yet strong enough to know all the 8 points. Genaro will someday show you the other 2. Does everybody have those 8 points, or only sorcerers? We may say that every one of us brings to the world 8 points. 2 of them, reason and talking, are known by everyone. Feeling is always vague but somehow familiar, but only in the world of sorcerers does one get fully acquainted with dreaming, seeing, and will. And finally, at the outer edge of that world, one encounters the other 2. The 8 points make the totality of oneself. He showed me in the diagram that, in essence, all the points could be made to connect with one another indirectly. I asked him again about the 2 mysterious remaining points. He showed me that they were connected only to will, and that they were removed from feeling, dreaming, and seeing, and much more distant from talking and reason. He pointed with his finger to show that they were isolated from the rest and from each other. Those 2 points will never yield to talking or to reason, he said. Only will can handle them. Reason is so removed from them that it is utterly useless to try figuring them out. This is one of the hardest things to realize. After all, the force of reason is to reason out everything. I asked him if the 8 points corresponded to areas or to certain organs in a human being. They do, he replied dryly, and erased the diagram. He touched my head and said that was the center of reason and talking. The tip of my sternum was the center of feeling. The area below the navel was will. Dreaming was on the right side against the ribs. Seeing was on the left. He said that sometimes in some warriors, seeing and dreaming were on the right side. Where are the other 2 points? I asked. He gave me a most obscene answer and broke into a belly laugh. You're so sneaky, he said. You think I'm a sleepy old goat, don't you? I explained to him that my questions created their own momentum. Don't try to hurry, he said. You'll know in due time, and then you will be on your own, by yourself. Do you mean that I won't see you anymore, Don Juan? Not ever again, he said. Genaro and I will be then what we always have been, dust on the road. I had a jolt in the pit of my stomach. What are you saying, Don Juan? I'm saying that we are unfathomable beings, luminous and boundless. You, Genaro, and I are stuck together by a purpose that is not our decision. What purpose are you talking about? Learning the warrior's way. You can't get out of it, but neither can we. As long as our achievement is pending, you will find me or Genaro, but once it is accomplished, you will fly freely, and no one knows where the force of your life will take you. What is Don Genaro doing in this? That subject is not in your realm yet, he said. Today, I have to pound the nail that Genaro put in, the fact that we are luminous beings. We are perceivers. We are an awareness. We are not objects. We have no solidity. We are boundless. The world of objects and solidity is a way of making our passage on earth convenient. It is only a description that was created to help us. We, or rather our reason, forget that the description is only a description, and thus we entrap the totality of ourselves in a vicious circle from which we rarely emerge in our lifetime. At this moment, for instance, you are involved in extricating yourself from the snarls of reason. It is preposterous and unthinkable for you that Genaro just appeared at the edge of the chaparral, and yet you cannot deny that you witnessed it. You perceived it as such. Don Juan chuckled. He carefully drew another diagram in the ashes and covered it with his hat before I could copy it. We are perceivers, he proceeded. The world that we perceive, though, is an illusion. It was created by a description that was told to us since the moment we were born. We, the luminous beings, are born with 2 rings of power, but we use only one to create the world. That ring, which is hooked very soon after we are born, is reason, and its companion is talking. Between the two, they concoct and maintain the world. So in essence, the world that your reason wants to sustain is the world created by a description and its dogmatic and inviolable rules, which the reason learns to accept and defend. The secret of the luminous beings is that they have another ring of power which is never used, the will. The trick of the sorcerer is the same trick of the average man. Both have a description. One, the average man, upholds it with his reason. The other, the sorcerer, upholds it with his will. Both descriptions have their rules, and the rules are perceivable, but the advantage of the sorcerer is that will is more engulfing than reason. The suggestion that I want to make at this point is that from now on, you should let yourself perceive whether the description is upheld by your reason or by your will. I feel that is the only way for you to use your daily world as a challenge and a vehicle to accumulate enough personal power in order to get to the totality of yourself. Perhaps the next time that you come, you'll have enough of it. At any rate, wait until you feel like you felt today at the irrigation ditch, that an inner voice is telling you to do so. If you come in any other spirit, it'll be a waste of time and a danger to you. I remarked that if I had to wait for that inner voice, I would never see them again. You'd be surprised how well one can perform if one is against the wall, he said. He stood up and picked up a bundle of firewood. He placed some dry sticks on the earth stove. The flames cast a yellowish glow on the ground. He then turned off the lantern and squatted in front of his hat, which was covering the drawing he had made in the ashes. He commanded me to sit calmly, shut off my internal dialogue, and keep my eyes on his hat. I struggled for a few moments, and then I felt a sensation of floating, of falling off a cliff. It was as if nothing were supporting me, as if I were not sitting or did not have a body. Don Juan lifted his hat. Underneath, there were spirals of ashes. I watched them without thinking. I felt the spirals moving. I felt them in my stomach. The ashes seemed to pile up. Then they were stirred and fluffed, and suddenly Don Genaro was sitting in front of me. The sight forced me instantly into my internal dialogue. I thought that I must have fallen asleep. I began to breathe in short gasps and tried to open my eyes, but my eyes were open. I heard Don Juan telling me to get up and move around. I jumped up and ran to the ramada. Don Juan and Don Genaro ran after me. Don Juan brought his lantern. I couldn't catch my breath. I tried to calm myself as I had done before by jogging in place while I faced the west. I lifted my arms and began breathing. Don Juan came to my side and said that those movements were done only in the twilight. Don Genaro yelled that it was twilight for me, and both of them began to laugh. Don Genaro ran to the edge of the bushes and then bounced back to the ramada as if he had been attached to a giant rubber band that made him snap back. He repeated the same movement 3 or 4 times and then came to my side. Don Juan had been looking at me fixedly, giggling like a child. They exchanged a furtive glance. Don Juan said to Don Genaro in a loud voice that my reason was dangerous and that it could kill me if it was not placated. "For heaven's sake!" Don Genaro exclaimed in a roaring voice. "Placate his reason!" They jumped up and down and laughed like 2 children. Don Juan made me sit down underneath the lantern and handed me my notebook. "Tonight, we're really pulling your leg," he said in a conciliatory tone. "Don't be afraid. Genaro was hiding under my hat."